avenue of invasion into the thinking of Heidegger as nihilism. Even Thomas Sheenan, who has advocated against the Herbert Dreyfus how to um, effortlessly function, or the how does he describe that as um, the way we're already doing things without drawing attention to ourselves, the coping, effortless coping, I think he calls it, Hubert Dreyfus version of Heidegger, that we should reorient ourselves back towards the Seinfrage, which then demonstrates the total missing of the mark, insofar as we have an archer shooting an arrow and a target that he's aimed at, which is to say, so far as we have an account of Heidegger, scientific account of Heidegger, which says Heidegger is like this is how one treats with Heidegger, and also a self who is supposed to receive this teaching and then in Socratic matter adapt to it. So taken in a larger view, so far as we have teachings at all about what human beings are like, even if that teaching is the Judith Butler teaching, which is according to Zizek. And I think here's where Zizek, the good part of Zizek, he's absolutely correct on this, is that liberalism is exactly this false attempt to extinguish the essence, which we see in its most absurd form in Sartre, its most unintentionally absurd form in Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre, by saying, by propounding what Isaiah Berlin would call authoritarian liberalism. So by saying, as Judith Butler does, there is no essence of the biological being, and so therefore there's no essence of woman or no essence of man. So whereas one could say, for instance, either, as was historically said, that the or let's give it just from Sean Connery's interview with Barbara Walters, where he's saying he thinks, on the basis that there's this notion, not a notion, I shouldn't even say it that way. He says that if the man is earning a living and therefore facing certain tasks that the wife, as a dependent who's not earning a living, isn't facing, then in this interview he says, in certain circumstances, he specifies an open hand slap. So that's not his exact words, but not not hitting with the fist, but a slap of some kind is, according to him, in certain justified in certain situations. So therefore, depositing a different, let's put it this way, there's a specific role, and that's the defining or determining or dispositive role for a being, and this we could call the essence, the definition. According to Thomas, says the essence is the definition. So then if you have something like a definition, that means basically, on the metaphor that the Greeks were so fond of, the Greeks are often think in a way that's stupendously simple, is the idea of that something like Aristophanes' Nephili, the clouds, can really genuinely show us possibilities of social life. This is the role that someone can play. Or let's say the assembly of women, for instance. This is the role that women could possibly play in a polis, and then that would define the essence. So it's not so much a question. It's not a scientific question. In the sense of experiment, totally, but it is it is in the sense that maybe this is something, even if we tried it for 20 generations, 1,000 generations, it would never work, because the biological material isn't like that, and you can't even through selective breeding or through genetic mutation get it to do that, but maybe you can. So that question is the question that now currently rages over liberalism, but it never, again, it's just like this Sheenan issue of trying to again say there's something called the Seinfrage, and then giving an answer. Here's how we should understand Heidegger, taking as a rubric over teaching, and the way we should understand him is presenting a teaching of passion or undergoing. He has some little, it's like 2 pages, not 2 pages, I don't know, it was like, I don't know, maybe it's like 20 pages, but I read it on a online thing, so I'm not sure. But it's not that long. The little account of Heidegger as regarding things as passion or as the self being undergoing emotions, rather than only being able to objectively pose questions. But so let's look at the more simple form that gets us. But okay, so first of all, no, that doesn't get us to what Heidegger's trying to get us to think. And the textual look at this is in Sein und Zeit, where Heidegger points to Tolstoy's Death of Ivan Ilyich, where he points to the thing about Caius or Gaius, I'm not sure how to pronounce, they spell it with a C, Caius, as certain syllogistic, logically determined traits, including that since he is immortal, then we can know out of the analyzing the concept, as Kant would say, we can know a priori that he's the kind of being that will die. And so this is this is sort of the most from the existentialist attitude, this is the central question of death as against various teachings, treating oneself as objective about what oneself is like through shooting that arrow at the target, and thereby sort of showing the repeatable version rather than the unrepeatable singular self. But this is kind of the Nietzsche's way of looking at it. There's the unrepeatable, which corresponds to, say, sociology of Auguste Kant, CLMTE, and then there's the repeatable, which corresponds to Newtonian, Kantian, and modern physics on the whole, so far as the non-repeatable means rule following and therefore necessary. So that would be a specific version, but let's look at the more primitive look at the idea by comparing Carl Jaspers, a close friend of Heidegger's during some years of his life, and a correspondent after the war with Hannah Arendt, version of the encompassing, as he calls it. So the encompassing is similar to Dasein, but let's try to see what kind of inversion changes the position. Remembering that this is only an avenue of invasion into Heidegger, and can't show us all the exact details of all the issues involved, e.g. The whole analysis of what I just sort of mentioned in passing of the division of the sciences between law-like universality and unrepeatable things, which are consigned to either to history or I would say really to the sociology department. That's what gives the sociology department its peculiar power, where it becomes a sort of religious force over all human beings, is that it's basically taken up the position which is most like something scientific, most like something law-like and eternal, but it's not law-like and eternal, but it keeps open to the radical unrepeatability of the just once, just this time, of the Iléa, or the Esgypt, or the there it is, which one is faced with in the terms which are still intelligible to the Aristotelian thinking, because Aristotle thought in terms of, here's this primary substance, ousia, which is only it's that thing that you point to. It's that one there is the primary substance, and then as a concept, we could either say this is a tree, or I could say no, this is not a tree. I could say reject the concept of tree and analyze it under some other concept. For instance, a physical entity with a certain magnitude of mass, with which under certain circumstances shines forth with colors. Depending on if you have an entity with eyes that's approaching it. So we don't have to have an entity with eyes approaching it, but on the Descartes analysis, which is very random, very easily, it's very easy to see that although it's built up and very takes some time to understand, and it's very rigorous in the way it's built up, nonetheless, in the larger scheme of things, there's many such systems of thought which are built up and rigorous, and which are more than persuasive, but even demonstrative in a mathematical sense, but nonetheless are ideas that have awakened at a certain moment in the 17th century, and for instance, on the point of the magnitude problem, and George Berkeley, as Bishop Berkeley has refuted the whole account as a supposed rational account by showing that magnitude also, which is the core of any geometric presentation, as Descartes starts with, is just as questionable as solidity or any of the other so-called secondary qualities. But so that took us aside some way. But let's go back to the attempt to look at the primitive version of Dasein in the encompassing idea of Jaspers, which is simply to say that there's something that we always seem to be facing, which we can call the Umwelt, or the environment, and that we assume, as it were, he doesn't say that we assume naively, but I assume, as an educated guess, that he must mean that we seem to spontaneously assume that the environment, or Umwelt, is given to everyone in the same way, and then only through interjecting this arrow shot of the intellect or reason, which is, according to existentialism, exposed to the passions, do we then say to ourselves, oh yeah, but what about colorblind people? Isn't the world given isn't the environment different for them in some way? And then, taken on the uniqueness of the presentation of this ourselves in Jasper's version of what's subtly always, we're forgetting that it's strange that the world is somehow something that's facing us in a way, so that we're always something that has a perspective on it, even if we assume spontaneously that it's his perspective on something that's given to others also, the environment. He says then all mystical experience involves this overcoming of this split. So, for instance, that one can be thrown and experience oneself as the remote objects. For instance, like up here, I don't know if it comes out in the video, but like you go up the stairs or whatever, you go up to the hill up here or whatever. But supposing we were already there, well, we are already there because this is given in our whatever's in our environment is reflecting within whatever this encompassing is, and then this getting, you see what it is, this trying to overcome the encompassing situation. Whereas, so what Heidegger wants to say is, prior to all of that, there's the Lichtung opening up, and then only afterwards did these different standpoints or these different Einstellungs, these different mental compositions of how to understand what's happening present themselves, and then such that then we get with Socrates, this so-called first theoretical man, who's the first one who's shooting arrows at the target, the first one that separated these two things constantly, such that we're still kind of stuck in that Das Man who we've inherited, and which somehow subtly permeates everything in liberalism, in its in this stage of advanced decay, so that a sort of bizarre situation opens up where there's people who oppose that as though it were some kind of satanic hubris to go against the not yet decayed version, but really they only do it as a kind of backward motion about something they don't quite understand, and somehow in connection to social issues, and not from the direct standpoint that poses nihilism as a possible solution to that, so that there's a kind of self-remedy, which is calling itself nihilism in Friedrich Nietzsche, and then two, there's Heidegger, who's presenting himself as this position prior to the breaking open of the standpoints is supposed to be reached, and that is supposed to that's also supposed to be somehow the manner that would give us a chance to look at the truth of being. But at the same time, it's not. There's a deep equivocation in whether it's meant as being struck by the arrow of Heidegger's teaching, or whether it's meant as in some other way.